Okay, so get ready, because today we are diving deep into red pill moments. Those moments, those experiences where people start to question like everything they thought they knew.
Yeah, those moments where everything changes.
And we're going deep into the comments sections, specifically of two YouTube channels for this deep dive. Lotuseaters.com and TheQuartering, to really try to understand what leads people to feel red-pilled.
Yeah, trying to crack the code? Like, what is going on here?
Why? Like, what's the method to this madness?
Exactly.
We're coming at this with open minds, obviously. Not here to judge, but to really just, like, get inside and understand what's driving these shifts in thinking. So where do we even start with this? It seems like a lot of these red pill stories, they start with this, like, underlying sense of distrust towards especially, like, traditional media.
Yeah, that keeps coming up again and again, for sure.
Like, they're saying, wait a minute. What I'm seeing with my own two eyes does not match up with what I am being told.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they're looking around, they're going, hold on, something's not adding up here.
And it's like a moment of almost like a break from reality, right?
Yeah, a break from the reality that they thought they knew.
Yeah.
The reality that they maybe had accepted for a long time.
Like Scott Can't Dance 804 said on that Lotus Eaters video.
Yeah.
About Trump and the koi fish.
Oh, yeah.
In Japan. Remember that whole thing?
I do, yeah.
Where you know, the way the media spun it, it was like this huge diplomatic blunder. Like,
yeah, showing disrespect for Japanese culture.
A sign of disrespect, exactly. But then this commenter, he's like, hold on, I saw the full video, and Trump was just following the lead of the Japanese prime minister.
Oh, right. It was totally taken out of context.
He was completely taken out of context. And that was his moment, he said, where he was like, wait a minute, I can't trust what I'm seeing in the news.
Makes you wonder what else they're not showing.
Exactly. Like, what else is not being shown?
Yeah, what's the full story here?
What's the full story? And it kind of snowballs from there, you know?
Yeah, you start to question everything.
It's like you start to question everything. Like George Bailey, 98, he commented on a video about immigration, and he was talking about, remember those reports about the child refugees arriving in the UK from the Calais jungle camp back in 2016.
Yeah, that was a big story.
Huge story.
A lot of different perspectives on that.
And he felt like the media was really pushing this narrative of these, like, you know, youngsters, you know, these like innocent children. But he was like, that's not what I'm seeing.
He felt like the visuals weren't matching the rhetoric.
At all. And that's what's so interesting, right? It's that dissonance, that feeling of like being told one thing, but then seeing something else. It's just not computing.
It's like a glitch in the matrix almost.
It is. It is. That's a great way to put it. And it just makes you question everything else, you know?
Exactly. It plants that seed of doubt.
And it's not just about immigration either. Keith Michael 112 talked about how his whole perspective on the Kyle Rittenhouse case shifted dramatically after he started, you know? Looking for information beyond just the initial news reports.
Oh, yeah, that case was, wow. That was incredibly polarizing.
So polarizing.
Very different narratives depending on where you're getting your news.
And he said that was it for him. He was like, there's no way. There's no way that there's this much of a discrepancy. And it's not the media trying to influence me.
He felt like he'd been lied to, basically.
He's like, I was lied to. And that's a powerful motivator to start questioning everything. But it's not always about these like big news events, is it?
No, definitely not.
There's a broader, like, I'm sensing this thread of anxiety, particularly about like the pace of cultural and demographic change happening in society.
Absolutely.
It's like this underlying feeling of like things are changing too fast.
And not just changing, but changing in ways that they might not agree with or understand.
And it's like they're trying to hold on to something, but the ground is shifting beneath their feet.
Exactly. That sense of instability, that loss of control.
And we see that reflected in the comments all the time, right?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Like that one from Wesley Warsmith, 1113, who just simply stated, seeing the demographic change from the 80s to the 2000s.
Wow. Yeah.
Just that. But you can feel the weight behind those words.
Oh, absolutely. You can sense a deeper unease there.
Like he's saying, like, this is not the world I grew up in. You
right,
know?
right, exactly. And it's not even necessarily about being opposed to change itself, but it's the speed, it's the scope, it's feeling like they're losing something familiar.
And it's like the rules were changed on them and they didn't get a say.
Yeah, and that can be really, really unsettling for people.
And that feeling is echoed by Reed Mathis 4288, who talks about watching his town change and feeling increasingly like alienated from the dominant cultural narrative. He specifically mentions a prominent politician using the term far right to describe people like him, which further fueled his sense of like being ostracized.
Wow. So it's like being labeled as the other, being pushed to the margins of acceptable discourse.
And told that their views are not welcome.
Exactly. It's like a silencing tactic almost.
Like they're being told to just be quiet and accept things as they are. That's just not human nature, right?
No. People crave authenticity. They crave the freedom to express themselves.
And they crave connection with others who share their values. But when you feel like you can't even express your views without being labeled or shamed, it pushes people into these corners.
And that's when they become more susceptible to extreme views. Because suddenly, these fringe groups offer a sense of belonging, a place where they feel heard and understood.
It's like finding a life raft when you're drowning in a sea of opposing opinions.
Exactly. And when you're desperate, you'll cling to anything that floats.
And that feeling of alienation seems to be like really amplified by encounters with what some people call woke culture, right?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Like this whole idea that you have to be hyper aware of every possible social justice issue and toe the line perfectly or risk being canceled.
Right. It creates this environment of fear and self-censorship.
Because nobody wants to be like the next viral villain.
Exactly. And it's ironic because it ends up stifling the very conversations that we need to be having.
Totally. Like at MG Shadow, 1989, shared a story about just declining a Pride event invitation. Okay.
And being labeled homophobic for it.
Wow. Just for declining politely.
Yeah, and he was like, I wasn't being disrespectful. I just, it's not my scene. But that for him was like a turning point where he felt like, okay, there's no room for even mild disagreement here.
Yeah, it's like you're either fully on board or you're the enemy.
It's so black and white, and it's that lack of nuance that I think is so frustrating for people.
Right, because life is complicated. And these issues are complex.
They're not black and white. There's so much gray area.
And it's in those gray areas where the most interesting conversations happen.
Exactly.
But those conversations can happen if we're too afraid to even enter the gray zone.
And it's like the rules of engagement have changed. Yeah, it's like social interaction has become a minefield.
Afraid of saying the wrong thing and then being like ostracized or shamed for it.
And that fear, that feeling of being silenced or shamed for your beliefs, that's a recurring theme in these red pill stories.
It's huge. It's like they're being told that their experiences, their feelings, their thoughts don't matter. And that's a really invalidating feeling.
Absolutely. And when people feel invalidated, they look for validation elsewhere.
Which brings us to Casper Celestem, Meba 5991, who had a teacher launch into a tirade about his father being a police officer.
Oh, wow. That's really bringing it to a personal level.
So personal. And you can just imagine like how hurtful and how much that would like make you question everything, right?
Absolutely. It's like your whole identity is being challenged.
It's like, wait a minute. My dad, who I love and respect, is now a symbol of oppression. Like, what?
Yeah, it's a really tough pill to swallow.
And when you have those kinds of experiences, it's easy to see why someone might start looking for alternative explanations for communities where they feel understood.
Right. They're seeking refuge from a culture that feels increasingly hostile.
And that's where things get really interesting, right? Because that search for answers can lead people down some very different paths.
It's true. Some people double down on their existing beliefs. Some people become more moderate. Some people go to the extremes.
It's like a fork in the road, and the direction they choose is often influenced by the people they encounter online, the information they consume, and the experiences they have in the real world.
Absolutely. It's a complex interplay of factors.
But it's not just about ideology and cultural clashes, is it?
No, not at all.
Like economics play a huge role in this too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Economics are often at the root of a lot of these anxieties and frustration.
Because at the end of the day, it's really hard to care about woke culture when you're worried about like putting food on the table and keeping a roof over your head, right?
Exactly. It's a matter of priorities. When your basic needs aren't met, it's hard to focus on anything else.
Totally. And we see that economic anxiety like woven through so many of these comments, right?
Yeah, it's a constant undercurrent.
It's the sense that the system is rigged against them.
That the game is set up for them to fail.
And they're just trying to like survive.
Yeah. And then they see others who seem to be thriving.
Yeah.
And they wonder why. What are they doing differently?
Like Visible Comment, who summed it up with one word. 2008.
Yeah, that says it all.
The bank bailout was like a turning point for a lot of people.
It felt like a betrayal.
It did. Felt like a betrayal.
Like the rules were different for the wealthy and powerful.
And that the average person was left to fend for themselves, like they were on their own.
Exactly. It eroded trust in institutions and the government, in the system as a whole.
It's like they finally saw the man behind the curtain and realized it was just a bunch of smoke and mirrors.
And once that illusion is shattered, it's hard to unsee it.
And it's easy to see why people would start looking for alternative explanations, for a different way of understanding how the world works.
Right. They're trying to piece together a new narrative, one that makes sense of their experiences and their anxieties.
And that's what makes this whole red pill phenomenon so fascinating and so complex.
It's a human story, ultimately. A story about the search for meaning, for belonging, for a sense of control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
And it's a story that's still being written. It's like they're searching for that like user manual for life, but the old one got thrown out.
Yeah, and they're trying to write a new one.
Exactly.
But the problem is there's no single author for this new manual.
So many different voices.
It's a collaborative effort, but with a lot of disagreements about what should be in it.
And a lot of those disagreements stem from very different lived experiences. Like take the original Fish Pond, who commented on a video about, I think it was about government overreach. And they were talking about how they had applied for a job at a government intelligence agency, and they were looking for, programs to kind of help advance their career, right? 100%. And they stumbled across all these options, but they were only available to minorities.
Wow.
And they were just floored.
Yeah, I can see why. It's like, you're telling me to climb the ladder, but then you're pulling the ladder up right in front of me.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the job itself. It's about the feeling that the system is rigged.
That you're being excluded.
That no matter how hard you work, you're always going to be at a disadvantage.
And that feeling can be so isolating, so alienating, right?
Absolutely.
And speaking of feeling alienated, we saw a lot of comments about dating and relationships, especially from men who feel like the cultural script has been flipped. Like everything they thought they knew about how to, interact with women, how to be in a relationship, it's like it doesn't apply anymore.
It's like the game changed, but nobody told them the new rules.
Exactly.
Or they feel like the rules are constantly changing.
And they can't keep up.
Which can be really frustrating.
Incredibly frustrating. And then they get labeled as toxic or misogynistic just for expressing their confusion or frustration.
Yeah, and that just shuts down the conversation entirely.
It's like, how do you even begin to have a dialogue when those are the terms being thrown around?
Right, it creates a really hostile environment.
One commenter at Devlin the Belfries 7292 really stood out. He was talking about how his experiences in the dating market, that was actually a central part of his red pill moment. He had all these encounters with what he called toxic feminism.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot.
He specifically said, it's this weird thing where they're demonized while pretending to be tolerant and inclusive and progressive.
Right, that sense of hypocrisy, of double standards.
The rules only apply to them, not the other way around.
It's a common theme. And it's not just about dating. It pops up in other areas of life, too.
Totally. And it's that feeling of, I'm being played here. I'm being, manipulated.
Something really disorienting.
And it's important to note, he wasn't just, drawing on personal experience here. He also mentioned, intellectuals like Eric Weinstein and Steven Pinker.
Oh, yeah.
Who've both been, pretty critical of what they see as, excesses within progressive movements.
So he's finding validation for his experiences in the work of, respected thinkers, public figures.
Yeah, it's not just him feeling this way. It's there's a bigger conversation happening, and he's tapping into that.
Exactly. It's he's found his tribe.
And speaking of tribes, we also wanted to dig into the comments on TheQuartering.
Yeah, they cover a lot of pop culture stuff, right?
Gaming, movies, that kind of thing.
Not exactly where you'd expect to find deep philosophical debates.
Right. But you'd be surprised, they did this whole video about Pizza Hut.
Pizza Hut.
Closing, hundreds of locations.
Oh, interesting.
And the comment section was wild.
Really? What were people saying?
Well, it wasn't just about pizza, obviously. It was about the reason behind the closures, with a lot of people blaming the $20 minimum wage in California.
Yes. The minimum wage debate, always a hot button issue.
Always.
Guaranteed to spark some strong opinions.
And it did. People were fired up. Some commenters like Tacitus Kilgore 1903 were I told you so. I told you this would happen.
They felt vindicated.
Totally vindicated. Like they'd been like predicting this all along.
That businesses would close or replace workers with robots.
Exactly. And they felt like their concerns were just being ignored.
That's a big part of it, right? That feeling of being dismissed, of not being listened to.
It's like they're screaming into the void.
And nobody's hearing them.
And then something like this happens. And it just like confirms their worst fears.
It reinforces that sense that the system is broken.
And that nobody in charge cares. But what really struck me about that whole Pizza Hut thread was like amidst all the like economic doom and gloom, you know, there were these comments that were just like expressing this like really simple sense of loss.
Loss.
Yeah, like they were genuinely sad to see Pizza Hut go.
Oh, interesting.
Like this one commenter at Pardon 620 said, "It's awful though. It's not the Pizza Hut of my childhood."
Wow, that's actually kind of heartbreaking.
It is, right.
It's like they're mourning the loss of something familiar.
Something comforting, something that reminds them of a simpler time.
When things weren't so complicated, so uncertain.
And that sense of loss, that longing for a simpler time, it seems to be this common thread in a lot of these red pill narratives.
Yeah, it's like they're witnessing the world they knew crumble around them.
And they're trying to make sense of it.
And for some people, that means questioning everything.
Everything they thought they knew.
About the world, about themselves, about the future.
And that can be a really scary place to be. Like we're all looking at the same picture, but we're seeing totally different things.
It's like that old saying, you know, about the blind men and the elephant.
Yes.
Each one's touching a different part. And they all think they know what it is.
Yeah.
But none of them have the full picture.
And the problem is, nobody wants to admit that they might be the blind man. Everyone thinks they've got the full elephant.
Exactly, and that's where the conflict comes in.
Because it's hard to have a conversation when you're starting from such different premises. Like when you're both convinced that you're looking at an elephant, but you're describing completely different animals.
And it's so easy to get caught up in the labels. You know, you're this, you're that.
Right, the name calling.
Instead of actually listening to what the other person is saying.
And trying to understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Exactly, because more often than not, there's a reason why someone sees the world the way they do.
It's based on their experiences, their values, their fears.
And until we understand those underlying factors, we're never going to bridge that divide.
It's like we're all products of our programming, right?
In a way, yeah.
We're all shaped by the information we consume, the people we surround ourselves with, the experiences we have.
And some of that programming is conscious, but a lot of it is unconscious.
We don't even realize it's happening.
And that's what makes it so challenging, because we're not always aware of the biases and assumptions that are shaping our own perceptions.
It's like we're all looking through these lenses that have been crafted over a lifetime, and we don't even know we're wearing them.
And those lenses color everything we see.
And it's so easy to judge other people for the way they see the world without ever stopping to consider that maybe, just maybe, they're seeing something that we're not.
Or maybe they're seeing the same thing, but from a different angle.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be open-minded.
To be willing to listen.
To be willing to learn.
To be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Because at the end of the day, none of us have all the answers.
And the more perspectives we can expose ourselves to,
the closer we'll get to understanding the full complexity of the human experience.
And maybe, just maybe, we'll find some common ground along the way.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive.